Okay, hi everyone. Good evening, students, industry representatives, alumni, and staff. Welcome to our spring session. The topic for tonight is all about sustainability in fashion. So my name is Deandra Haupt. I will be moderating the session, and the purpose of this is to really engage with various strategies that link to sustainability and how we can actually implement them within fashion. So the main presenters of the session is Sarah Bueta and Laura Lange, and they'll be doing discussion with Redwana Shaikh and Jackie May, as well as Cyril Nike, and each panelist will be presenting a specific aspect of sustainability as it relates to fashion. So considering the topic of the session and our presenters, it's really important to understand that the opportunities for change that are evident within the fashion industry when thinking about sustainability are numerous, and it spans from transforming fashion products to transforming fashion systems, as well as fashion design practice in an educational sphere. So it's difficult to doubt the fate of the planet and the environment. I think we've all been bombarded with various platforms on things that are going wrong with the environment, from changes in weather patterns, wildfires in Australia and the US, to the recent floods in Europe. And I think it's moved from a current state of climate crisis and not so much more climate change. Okay. So most of the population, I think, believes that someone else is going to fix the problem. And oftentimes it might be someone with a scientific background that's going to save us, and we can go on living our lives as we have. And this might be true. I think there is scientists, there are researchers that are studying the earth, that are studying the systems and trying to better understand the impact that human activity has on the environmental system. These studies are really important. We can't deny them. However, the effort of implementing actual change needs to be driven by people everywhere. So people who are experts in their own disciplines, their own sectors, and these efforts to implement the change would need to be driven by a shared knowledge and networking aspect. That's so that everyone that believes in this innate change or this love for nature and nurturing life. And I think the one product category that elicits more press, is constantly under scrutiny, and has more publications dedicated to it, is that of the fashion industry. Okay, fashion gives us the ability to be who we want to be. We can reflect our identities with the outfit that we are wearing. We can change, and the swap of an outfit, you can change who you are. And we also dress to be warm, to be cool, to look beautiful and professional. And many of us every day carefully curate what we want to wear. Okay. We also consciously and unconsciously judge others by what they are wearing. So clothing and shoes and accessories are all signifiers of specific things like income, your taste, your class, your upbringing, and even your attitude. And fashion provides us with the means to reflect who we are, but also signify that we are part of a bigger or wider social group. So I think most consumers, and you guys attending tonight, are all hyper aware of the latest styles and the latest fabric and colors that are available in stores. And all these aesthetic components are constantly championed in the world of fashion, but it leaves very little consideration for the world behind the fashion garment. So the technology behind the style, the fiber behind the fabric, and as well the intense process that actually goes into cultivating and growing those fibers. So I think there's very little consideration of where our clothing actually comes from. We don't really always consider as consumers the true impact that a fashion garment can have. And fashion has a complex relationship with these larger systems like the environment, like the society and the economy. But this complexity does allow for sustainable strategies and interventions to happen at multiple levels, So things like design-led or emergent solutions can be explored and investigated, and this will have a meaningful impact in moving our industry towards sustainability. So focus on practice and practical design-led interventions poses a means for sustainability to not just be an afterthought, but also kind of really consider the entire fashion value chain and where we can change things. So I think it's very much fashion's time to inspire possibility and implement change for production to purchasing of that fashion item. And then taking an excerpt from Kate Fletcher, her Design and Nature book, design's an activity that makes ideas, artifacts, and spaces become real. Design has tremendous agency, a capacity to change the way we live in the world. And I think influencing design in a conscious manner can result in substantial change within our industry, especially within a system problem such as sustainability, where we might never actually achieve 100% sustainable industry, doesn't matter where you are in the fashion value chain. And I think tonight affords everyone the opportunity to become part of this network that is focused in implementing change. And everyone involved, all the panelists are going to look at things like creating new mindsets for the future in fashion, exploring circular economy opportunities, and looking at a way of promoting things to be, or promoting initiatives and campaigns to be sustainable. And on that note, our first presenter will give us some, after we've now given context on the topic, this first presenters will be discussing how these sustainable elements can work within a circular economy. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah and Laura. You guys can switch on your camera and introduce yourselves to the audience visually. Okay, guys, so looking at Sarah's background, she's a fundamental asset to the fashion industry. She's an expert in circular design. So she started her journey by obtaining a BA degree in journalism and media studies, as well as sociology, and then furthering her studies doing a BA in honors in sociology. And after her studies, Sarah gained work experience in PR across tourism, education, tech sectors, and ultimately it was a love and appreciation for beauty in clothing, as well as a conviction in bettering the world through her work, that she redirected her career path into sustainable fashion. So Sarah received a master's degree in sustainable fashion and creative industries on a research topic, rethinking textile waste as the resource in South Africa. And she's also managed to be in the top 3 of her master's program, which is amazing. So currently Sarah is freelancing as a circular design consultant while being a researcher and curator on circular design studies for the World Circular Textiles. And then our other presenter, Laura. She's an expert in the sustainable fashion and creative industries, and due to her qualifications and more than 6 years of experience working in creative industries, she's received a BA degree in fashion design from LCI International University in Barcelona and her master's degree in sustainable fashion and creative industries at Academia Mode and Design in Berlin. So she's used her background as a fashion designer to explore different paths in the fashion ecosystem that allow it to understand its complexity and potential and drive actual change. So she uses her slow fashion philosophy to craft products in small-scale business, as well as driving the concept of eco-conscious in fast-paced environments, while still working for a large corporation. And her aim is to help organizations to conceptualize and develop new sustainable products and services by addressing the collective needs, so planet and humans, as well as reframing the design paradigm towards a more democratic future. So I'm going to hand over to you, ladies, and you can start the discussion.
All right. Thank you so much for that introduction. All right, I'm just going to share my screen. If everyone can just let me know, can you see it? View full screen. Laura, can you see my screen?
I can clearly see your screen, yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so hi everyone. We are so excited to be speaking to you all today. And thank you to Stadio for this amazing opportunity. So we were asked to present a short discussion around sustainability. We found it quite a challenge to narrow down ideas, as this is such a broad topic and it's something that we are so very passionate about. But it also touches on so many issues within the fashion industry and can also be a little bit uncomfortable as well. So our goal in the next 15 minutes is to cover some emerging areas within the sustainable fashion debate and open up a conversation that really takes sustainability forward. We know we can't cover everything, but we really hope that we'll open up to you all up to new ways of thinking. So with that, let's start.
I think it's not working, Sarah.
Is it not?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Oh, yes. Okay. So, what is sustainability? So, by definition, the term sustainability means meeting our own needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. However, while we could think that this is a buzzword of the last decade, the truth is that the principle of continuously enduring and sustainable use was discussed for the first time in the 18th century by Hans Carl von Carlowitz in the Wall Street Treaty Silvicultura or Economica. So sustainability comprises of 3 dimensions: social, which means equality of opportunities for people involving welfare, quality of life, and sustainable human development; environmental, which is the management of physical environment in a way that supports living within ecological limits, and the protection of natural resources; and economic, and this means practices that support long-term economic growth without negatively impacting social, environmental, and cultural aspects of the community. For true sustainability, all these 3 dimensions need to be activated. So in the context of fashion, sustainability seems to be a hot and current topic. Both brands and wearers are talking more and more about it. But the notion of sustainable fashion is still a very broad term and can feel vague to what it actually means. We often see the use of new environmentally friendly materials, but these same brands continue to produce 1 billion garments that use natural resources while abusing workers in their supply chains. So this cannot be true sustainability. So then what does sustainability in a fashion context really mean? If we actually then refer to these 3 dimensions that we mentioned earlier, this umbrella term can be defined as taking into account the environmental and socioeconomic aspects and developing and marketing fashion products in the most responsible way. However, due to the lack of a common benchmark across the industry, this definition is highly susceptible of misguided interpretation, which can lead to the phenomena such as greenwashing. And what remains unknown is, do companies greenwash because they have hidden agendas, or because their sustainability maturity level is low, and therefore this is the only way they know how to move forward towards a sustainable future? So perhaps the only way to get rid of greenwashing is by increasing the sustainability maturity stage of companies and end users. In a nutshell, fostering a new mindset.
So we've mentioned that sustainability is an umbrella term, but what a new framework that's gaining a lot of attention is this of the circular economy, which is really based upon 3 principles. 1 is to design out waste and pollution. 2 is to keep products and materials in use. And 3 is about regenerating natural systems. And this model really goes beyond the current take, make, waste, linear approach that much of the fashion industry is based upon. So when we think about what could this look like for the fashion industry, this means shared textile resources in the form of products and raw materials that are kept in continual circulation. Virgin resources are replaced with circular materials, and there's dignity, equity, and equality for the people involved in all parts of the circular value chain. So why do we need a sustainable fashion system? Well, I think we can all agree that in the last year and a half with the global pandemic, the shortfalls of the current economic system, which is based upon that linear approach to resources, which are extracted and left to waste, it causes huge environmental changes, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. Additionally, the pandemic has highlighted the vulnerability of these global systems and the shortfalls in protecting health, the environment, and the economy, and the vast inequalities which exist in this current linear system. Fashion has a tremendous environmental footprint that exists within that linear system, and you can see some of the statistics year on year just there on the right. So we're seeing huge use of natural resources, but also fashion also contributes about approximately 4% of the world's waste. It's estimated about $400 billion worth of clothing ends up in landfills or incineration due to poor end-of-life solutions or recycling technologies that can't cope with the volume of clothing that's produced. Should the business as usual continue, the fashion and the growth that's anticipated, which is being driven by emerging markets in Africa and Asia, the fashion industry faces not only severe environmental challenges, but also economic challenges. We're on a trajectory to generate approximately 160 million tons of clothing sales by 2050, which is more than 3 times of today's amount, with very poor end-of-life solutions, and recycling technology is not at no clothing to clothing recycling technologies exist at its scale. But the industry also stands to see a decline of earnings, approximately 3% decline before interest and tax by 2030, costing money. And then most worryingly, of course, is that the fashion industry will contribute approximately 26% of the carbon budget, which is associated with the 2°C global warming rate by 2050. So what we're saying here is something has to change.
And what does this mean for the future of fashion? What's becoming clear and clear is that there's a need for radical change in the industry, moving beyond accepted habits and practices that are devastatingly destructive. But what could that look like? Some industry leaders, designers, and foresighters have all varying ideas of what the future of fashion will hold. Some think we may see more used and locally made clothing. We will see more unique and expressive styles that celebrate our diversity. Or on the other side, a fully immersive digital fashion reality where everything exists in the clouds and does not represent specific culture or national identities. Fashion has become purely utilitarian to protect wearers from the effects of severe climate change, or our need to express ourselves will continue, but we won't own our clothing. Instead, we will share and rent clothing to fulfill our need for newness. So while these scenarios may seem extreme, they point to the industry's collective need to engage in critical questions that reimagine and reconsider fashion's ecological, social, economic, and cultural impact in order to radically redefine how we can live well together in nature. So what is becoming clear is that to enable that this transformation of the industry, we need to shift towards new ways of thinking, understanding, and acting. And one way to achieve this is by leaving behind the traditional silos mindset, protectionism, and secrecy that has prevailed in the industry for decades, and in turn allowing a diversity of perspective and making synergies happen across industries. So the intersection of different industries and disciplines such as art, science, technology, and engineering coming together not only will accelerate research and innovation for fashion's new frontier, but will offer a wide and interesting range of career opportunities in fashion. So as we shift away from linear modes of operation to a circular clothing industry, we will see how current jobs and skills will only become more prevalent. We will need more specialized jobs. New jobs in the repair sector will emerge, from remanufacturing designers to employees that assess quality of second-hand garments. Resale collection managers and technical, associate, and professional level workers in technology and e-commerce will come to the fore in resale, while increasing collection and sorting will see a boost in the number of textile sorters and manual textile collectors. So since the shaping of these new roles, as well as the search for job opportunities in the sustainability sphere can be quite overwhelming, we have put together some examples of existing positions that are either currently taken by professionals or announced by pioneers in the field, as you can see on the left side. And as we both believe in the power of foresighting, we also wanted to share what industry experts are predicting as promising careers, such as you can see here, bioengineering, textile chemist, smart clothing specialist, or sustainability manager and virtual showroom designers, and so on.
So as we come to the end of our talk, we wanted to ask the question, how could South Africa's fashion industry benefit from the shift that is coming and that needs to come within the next 10 years? Laura and I both studied in Germany, and I conducted my research in South Africa, speaking to retailers and designers around what sustainability meant for them. And there is this common feeling that the global north is dominating that conversation of sustainability, and the model for South Africa is different and needs to be different. So using some of our research, looking at these emerging trends, we proposed the following ideas for the fashion industry, and we called it a time of rebirth. We see this as a unique opportunity to conceptualize a new fashion industry, one that builds upon our design and craft heritage while contributing new design approaches that move sustainability forward and creates job opportunities. So our first driver is this movement to revive local textile industries and increase local manufacturing and jobs. We know that the South African textile industry lost its competitiveness over the last 15 years, but there is a pressing need in the South African economy for an industry that is labor intensive, like the clothing and textile industry, to help ease the high unemployment rates we're seeing. At the same time, we're seeing leading retailers such as the Fashini Group, Pepkor, Edcon, and Woolworths have all pledged to create 60,000 new jobs by 2030. And these same retailers have signed a plan to source 65% of their goods from local manufacturers to unlock value and opportunity within the local supply chain. This focus on stimulating the textile industry as what also intersects with the South African government's wider plans of growing and promoting local manufacturing within the next decade. So our argument is maybe in this time in the next decade of moving towards a sustainable future, there's an opportunity to create a sustainable design and production within South Africa and integrating, recycling, remanufacturing, all of those jobs that Laura mentioned, and help grow industries within South Africa. Part of that is that we already have an established heritage of craft and design. So the creative industries of which South Africa, which fashion and craft is included in, is a major driver for sustainable economic livelihoods for local communities, and it contributes approximately 90 billion rand, while South African fashion designers contribute at least 1 billion rand to the country's GDP in 2019. Added to this, South Africa is gaining momentum to become an art and design hub for the world. Part of that, what's driving that, is this growing international prominence of South African designers. We're seeing a real curiosity and interest in what's coming out of South Africa. It's almost becoming a renaissance. We've seen that Miley Cyrus was recently photographed in a suit by Tebe Magugu, while Cindy Sukumalo was a finalist in the LVMH Prize in 2020 and is now selling on international retail site Net-a-Porter. There's so many other amazing designers I want to mention, but I just wanted to highlight just a key few of them, and all of them that are also championing sustainable design practices while also finding a claim on an international stage. The fourth driver that we see that's coming is this rise of conscious consumerism and the demand for sustainable fashion practices. Known as Generation Conscious, with millennials and Generation Z have increasingly championed the concept of conscious living and are driving those circular business models and circular models of consumption, such as resale in fashion marketplaces, clothing rental, and the upcycling and recycling of clothing. They will continue to be a driving force in the future while increasing purchasing power. And finally, Laura's really highlighted how tech has a major role to play in mobilizing a circular fashion industry. Even the local South African industry will need these skills more and more in the future. And what's really exciting is to see how Cape Town is becoming a flourishing startup ecosystem and is also on a mission to become an African tech hub. We're seeing these new emerging skills that are also coinciding with the government's plans of increasing digital skills capacity, and all of which are attributing to growth in South Africa and becoming an outsourcing hub. So with that, it's time to reimagine a new narrative and legacy for the fashion industry and for South Africa, and look at how South Africa in the next decade can be well placed in not only promoting sustainable fashion practices, but also growing new industries and new opportunities for the future. So that was a real whistle-stop tour of some of the most pressing issues we're seeing in fashion. And so we just wanted to highlight that if you are interested in finding out more, Laura and myself will be running a short online course covering some of the issues we spoke about, but also looking a bit more at innovative textiles, processes, consumer psychology, the new technologies that are coming out, decolonizing fashion. And we'll be starting that course from the 2nd of October. It'll run for 12 weeks. And if you are interested in finding out more, you can just scan that QR code and it'll take you to the website where you can find out a bit more information. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Laura and Sarah. I think it was really lovely that you guys brought sustainability to South Africa or linked it to that, because I think oftentimes we think it is this concept, it's only happening overseas. And the fact that you framed it in this rebirth model, championing local textiles, local production, I think that's quite lovely. Do you guys think that South African retailers are open towards moving towards this? Looking at our own heritage, local textile production, is there a market almost for that?
Yeah, so that was something that was so wonderful, was when I did my research last year, I was able to speak to quite a few retailers, and I just want to highlight the Fashini group in particular, who are really, really moving towards local manufacturing, and job creation is a very key part of what they're doing. So yes, I do think that there is this desire to move there. I think we also need to plug some gaps around education and growth in these industries. But I will definitely say that, yeah, there's a real openness to how can we get there? How can we grow this industry?
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, guys, I'm opening up questions. Does anyone in the chat maybe have a question for Laura or Sarah? I think someone asked earlier if the data that you guys showed, is that for 2021 or 2020? The statistics in terms of the fashion industry and how it's contributing to waste.
That was from 2019 and 2018's data.
Okay. Okay, guys, any other questions in the chat? I think we can just give a few seconds to see if someone's maybe typing. If you guys had to think, how long would it actually take for a retailer to move to real sustainability? Because you guys touched on this idea of greenwashing, and I think it's something we are really faced with. They highlight one element and you buy it and you think, oh my goodness, this is a sustainable textile, I'm making the right choice. But if a retailer really wants to move towards that, is it about making small changes along the way, or how would you actually go about it?
I think, Laura, this might be one for you.
Yeah, I was about to jump in. So from my personal experience, because in the past I was working for 3 years for a big fashion corporation, and it was the very first time that I realized, the bigger picture of it. So of course, like even massive retailers, even if they want to make a change to transform their business, this is such a complex and vast, interaction of different parties in it. So in the end, you can't from one day to another change it. Like even if you have this willingness, you need to, it's a progress. It's, a transformation. Even as we said, the word sustainability is something that still, it's being redefined day by day. So I think it's about having the commitment, taking action, and really not putting out their collections and showcasing what you wish to do, but really trying to start from the very beginning, where everything's starting, even at the farmers, and looking at all the different aspects and what's going in between. I think just breaking this, again, what we said, silos mindset, and coming together and trying to think more holistically. That's the key.
And speaking of mindsets, Radwana asked, how accepting are South Africans to the rental model?
Yeah, so I think that this is something that's also emerging. I was just quickly making sure I had my right information. There's Style Rotate, which I believe is based in Cape Town, and that is gaining traction for sure. So yeah, I think more data, more research is needed into this area, but it is happening. And I also think platforms like Yaga, which is also, I think, launched in the last year and a half, is also gaining significant traction. So this resale model as well is coming up.
Okay, thank you guys, and thanks for the questions and the very insightful discussion. I think you guys highlight really interesting points, and from what the people are commenting in the chat, I think it's really lovely to see that it is within a South African market. So thank you for that. And then next, guys, we're going to speak to our industry experts on the topic of exploring circular economy opportunities. Ridwana is going to talk about her work and the readiness of small businesses to lead the change in sustainability. So first of all, I'd like to introduce her. So a bit of background. She's an expert in the global footwear industry. She runs numerous businesses over the years, starting her journey in Milan's renowned footwear and leather goods school. She was enraptured by the art of design and subsequently went to acquire skills leading to bespoke footwear construction from Master Cordwainer in the United States. So recently she's founded a sustainable design consultancy named Green Start Ideas. And this company focuses on aiding brands in navigating the transition to a leaner circular economy. So her admirable background in sustainability and deeper focus in the circular economy has afforded her the opportunity to work closely with both local and international clients, and then grants a valuable and universal perspective in the industry. So Ridwana, when you're ready, you can start.
Thank you so much for that very glowing introduction. And thank you very much to Stadio for this opportunity to chat to so many people on such an incredible platform. I'm really, really quite humbled and grateful for it. So, like you said, my name is Ridwana, and I am a sustainability-led design consultant. I've been in the footwear industry for about 11 years, and as Deandra said, I have studied in the Netherlands, the USA, Italy. I also spent a couple of years in China, cutting my teeth in the international manufacturing space. And I have had a consultancy before, and I'm just rebranding now. So the consultancy that I have just recently rebranded is called Green Start Ideas. And through this consultancy, I help clients to navigate the production development space in a very sustainable and circular way. Over the years, I've worked with footwear and accessory brands like Vivo Barefoot, Fly Pony, Grom, Ash, Jean-Michel Casbah, a whole lot of others. And I've had the opportunity and the good fortune to work with brands that are continental as well as around the globe. I think it's a very interesting perspective if you look at it from both sides. My expertise lies in taking an idea from concept to product in like the easiest, most efficient way possible. I have a podcast and web series that I started during lockdown called Ray of Green. And this series explores elements of sustainability within business and how to benefit fiscally whilst being responsible. Through this, one of the biggest insights that I had gleaned was that smaller brands are in a really great position to start off on the right foot when it comes to their sustainable story. They're more agile, their mindset is around innovation and change, and it's also far more, in my experience, financially beneficial to start off with your sustainability story from the get-go instead of trying to pivot halfway through. So my practice is informed by the principles of the circular economy and are also informed by just how sustainable can we make the products that we consume. And every project is started off by thinking of the 3 Ps for us. That is people, planet, and lastly, profit. As a creative, before putting pen to paper, I have to think about the end of life for the product that I have a hand in developing. So what will become of the product that I am designing or developing after it has served its primary purpose and the purchaser no longer wants or needs it? So I believe that creating footwear, much like the rest of the fashion industry, really does have a bad reputation. And it is a well-earned bad reputation because, like the fashion industry in general, it places a heavy burden on finite resources. As such, I think that we need to rethink about how we consume, about why we consume, And also, I think the biggest rethink needs to lie around just how are we going to create the products that we now seem to be unable to do without? How do we consume responsibly? So, personally and professionally, I believe that the entire value chain needs a rethink. But I am happy to say that many brands, both global and local, are showing a seriousness about change, about real and tangible change around this issue that we've never seen the likes of it before. But there are so many more brands that are no longer driven by profit first. And I think that perhaps in the last maybe 50 years of business, we've never seen that. We've never seen this kind of urgency with which some brands are dealing with the situation. In my opinion, I think that as Africans, in some respects, not all, in some respects, we are leading the sustainability charge. And I think this is simply because many of the facets of sustainable living, it's quite endemic to us as Africans. But that being said, I think that we're also vulnerable to the allure of fast fashion, fast and cheap fashion. And our industries are vulnerable to carbon exploitation by big businesses. And we're experiencing higher levels of clothes dumping than ever before. And examples of clothes dumps that are absolutely mind-blowing is in Ghana, the Kantamanto market, or, for instance, the clothing soup that's usually found along the coastlines of East Africa. And these all are pointing to this inherent problem that we have with overconsumption. And, it's for me, it's so bothersome. But if we talk about footwear, it's notoriously difficult in terms of sustainable thinking to think about end of life, because it's usually made from multi-materials and the bonding processes are so complex sometimes that it's really difficult to be able to disassemble. However, through circular thinking, we can think about it, we can explore ways to extend the usability factor. And Sarah and Laura had touched on the idea of like closed rentals and that sort of ideas. And these are what we consider as extending the usability factor of the product that we make. The rethink of footwear could lead to many more types of new employment opportunities within the space. So at Green Start Consultancy, we offer these circular economy evaluations. And coincidentally, one of your guests from your last session, Nchansha from Ivani, is actually undergoing an evaluation now. And we simply look at 8 points around how can this business become something that is a little bit more circular. No one hits all of those 8 points at the same time, not unless you're some kind of superstar business. But it's a great start to help businesses figure out how they can leverage the opportunities that can be afforded by the circular economy. Because as Sarah and Laura had said in the beginning of their presentation, the circular economy is built around those 3 principles. And each of those 3 principles are all about not wasting, not throwing away valuable resources. So, it also helps brands to think about other ways of getting to that final product, as opposed to thinking about same old traditional manufacturing. For example, I am working with a barefoot shoe company who is now developing a product that is not going to even touch traditional shoemaking at all. It uses 2 processes of one is 3D knit, using recycled filaments, and the second process is 3D bonding. So within the process of making, we've managed to cut out at least like 70% of manufacturing waste, which, if you think about traditional shoemaking, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. So yeah, I think these newer technologies that we think about, it can be a big step up for brands that generally are only sort of like, thinking with blinkers on, and then this is how you make a product, and this is how it has always been made, and this is how we will always make it. That kind of thinking is a little bit destructive, considering that it's the same kind of thinking that has got us into the problem that we are currently facing. So I think in closing, I don't want to take up too much time, but in closing, I really would like to ask brands about thinking of their role in this climate emergency that we face, and how, as an industry that is quite guilty and quite culpable that we're quite guilty about the current emergency that we're in, but how do we as an industry reach net zero? How do we get there? And yeah, I'm very happy to answer any questions that come from this, but that is my bit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ridwana. I think it's lovely that you also linked to this idea of changing your mindset. And you said very much businesses have these blinkers on, and I think there's one way of doing it. And just by incorporating technology, we can change, the whole production process. So I think that very much also links with Sarah and Laura and what they said about changing the way that we think, identifying these opportunities. And then you said in the South African market. So I was just wondering if in our country where, income is so disparate, do you think sustainability or the kind of cost of being sustainable, is that something that can work in a third world country?
Mm-hmm. That's a really great question. And it's not the first time that this question has come up on a platform as such. Because if we think about the brands that are doing the most, for example, maybe we talk about Veta Capsule, for instance, those are kind of, they're so expensive. One t-shirt costing goodness alone knows how much, and it's a really great concept to be able to not change your wardrobe as much as you would want to. But is it affordable for the general South African? No, it's not. But that is something that we as an industry actually have to work on. I think at some point, conversations like this are no longer going to be very necessary, because whether we like it or not, we have to make positive changes within the way we make, within the way we source, within the way we create. There's going to be no longer this luxury of saying, oh, I have to think about it now. I have to maybe consider doing 15% towards my sustainability story. It's no longer going to be an option. But the sooner we all realize that we have to get there faster, I think the sooner it becomes within the reach of the average South African. So I don't have a right, wrong answer for you, but I do think that it's a collective effort by industry to try and put sustainable fashion at a level where it's no longer going to be competing with the idea of, it's no longer competing for people's pocket power. It just has to be a conscious choice that the person would make, a consumer would make. They'll go to, for example, a Zara, and they'll go to Sustainability X and then say, well, the 2 t-shirts cost exactly the same amount of money. I would probably make a decision of going with Sustainability X. So okay. Yeah, there's no real answer for it, except that we've got to do more as an industry.
Okay, cool. Laura and Sarah, I'm sure you guys have a question for Ridwana. Are you guys wanting to address it now?
Sure. If I think I could jump in with one question that we have. So, like, thinking about the circularity coming into fashion and the role of designers, how do you think this will shape the role of designers in the future? You were thinking that brands, or that you were, like, as a creative, thinking of the afterlife of products, but like, how do you see this role coming in the future?
That is such a brilliant question. I think for designers that are already established and they no longer need an education refresher, it's going to have to come from within the research that they do for themselves. But I think the opportunity lies in educating better. For this new generation of designers that are coming, they are the ones that can definitely lead the charge. So yeah, it's definitely, for me, it's got to be about educating properly. And I think that, colleges like higher education institutions like Stadio, for instance, doing the most with your sustainability courses, for instance, already tells designers, tells young creatives that there is more to a product that you are thinking of than just drawing a pretty picture on a paper or doing a beautiful cat. There is more to that story. And yeah, so for me, I think it's definitely the answer is education.
Thanks so much, Ridwana. Is there any of the other panelists that would like to ask a question? Okay, I think while they chat, there is one question from one of our audience members. So Simonez asks, she can imagine implementing new ways of approaching production can have quite a few errors in the process. So pilot processes always have their mistakes. So how do you approach this with a manufacturing company that doesn't want to lose money? How do you make that transition?
That's a really great question, and it's also a very difficult one. That's a very good question. So in my experience, working with smaller manufacturing companies definitely helps. In South Africa, we have a range of manufacturers, right? We between Cape Town and Durban, they have those really huge guys, and you have those sort of smaller guys. And it's usually, in my experience, it's the smaller manufacturers that are way more willing to try something outside of their comfort zones to experiment with. There are brands that have just recently launched that have processes that are not traditional to, for example, traditional sneaker making. And the only way they reached success in their development processes was to work with the smaller guys. The bigger manufacturers are unfortunately profit-driven. They're driven by quantity, and this is the way their production lines are set up, and it makes sense for them. Doesn't necessarily make sense for a business that is just starting out. But my advice would be go with a smaller manufacturing company because they're more willing to help.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I would have thought the smaller ones would be the ones that struggle, but I think it's lovely to hear that they're actually the ones that are willing to implement new techniques of manufacturing and doing things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. Thank you so much. Very insightful discussion, Radwana. Thank you for your contributions.
Thank you.
Okay, guys, our next industry representative is Cyril Nijker. So he has a wealth of experience in the industry with major brands. Currently, he's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Plain Tiger. And Cyril also serves as the Chief Executive at Imprint Luxury and the Country Coordinator at Fashion Revolution South Africa. So he's got 20 years in the apparel sphere, and Cyril has dealt with every point of the fashion value chain. So from start to finish, he's built a strong ethical stance on fashion, and he has participated in an array of panel discussions, and he's even represented South Africa at the United Nations discussion on sustainable fashion. So Cyril, you can turn on your mic and your camera. And thank you so much for joining our session. We're looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Deandra. Very good to meet everybody, and thank you all. So I'm pretty much going to talk to you as if we were sitting in my lounge and we were having a conversation, because I believe we're talking to a lot of students and some industry makers as well. So I want to talk a little bit about how it all started for me. And I studied fashion design, and I was really passionate about the industry and probably disillusioned at the same time, because I believed that all I was going to do was design beautiful clothing, manufacture it in a beautiful way, and I'd be extremely rich. That wasn't the case. So after I studied fashion designing, I got to come to Cape Town. I'm from KwaZulu-Natal. Moved to Cape Town, worked for a huge retailer in the city as a buyer in menswear. And we would do a lot of trips between London and manufacturing in China. And I soon realized that I literally was a glorified copy artist, and that was not really what I wanted to do. And I kind of battled with what is it that I'm actually doing, and what am I doing to the industry that I actually loved. So it was on a trip to India, which was pretty much a holiday, that I actually got lost in Delhi, in a particular area in Delhi, and I stumbled into a factory. And because I was on holiday, I wasn't in work mode. So I saw people for the first time. I saw the factory set up for the first time. And I saw what human slavery actually looked like. And I came back to Cape Town after that holiday. I resigned from my job as a buyer. And I realized that if I wanted to go back into the clothing industry, I had to go back making a difference, and I had to go back on my terms. Unfortunately, I was slapped with a restraint of trade from my company, so I couldn't work in the buying sector in the fashion industry for 2 years. And this is way back. This is over 24 years ago. And what happened in that time, I then moved into marketing and PR and sort of worked in that industry for a little bit. And then, unfortunately, 2013 happened. And you all know where I'm going to go with this. In 2013, we had the Rhinoplasty Collapse that killed over 1,000 workers and injuring 2,000 more. And this really was the biggest catastrophe in the clothing industry, and quite honestly could have been avoided, but it all came back to greed, and it came back to fast fashion. Now, please hear me when I say that I believe that we're all in business for profit. It is important, but I think the way in which we work with getting money is important. It's our conscious levels. So this was something that gave rise to Fashion Revolution. And Fashion Revolution is a global activism NGO that really addresses the value chain and wants people to think about shopping better, but in terms of industry, talks about the manufacturing processes to people and planet. And so I've been part of the Fashion Revolution South Africa team. I don't do this by myself. We have an incredible team of amazing people that we all volunteer our time. And we believe in this. And we believe in a fashion industry that's free, a fashion industry that's fair, and a fashion industry that actually is conscious. So during the 8 years of working with Fashion Revolution, what has been interesting to note, specifically back here in South Africa, we saw the rise of fast fashion from brands that have come into our country. We saw manufacturing collapse. We saw design on the decline. And it's hugely devastating when this has been what you're passionate about, when it is what you are interested in doing, and when you see this all around you. However, over the last few years, we've seen a huge growth in sustainability. We've seen a huge growth in local talent. And thanks to Laura and Sarah that highlighted Sindiso Khumalo and Tebo Magugu, and there are many others like Lukhanya Mendingi that have really been putting a spotlight on South African fashion and been raising the flag for South African fashion. But there's a flip side to that story as well, in that while these designers are really doing the best to manufacture locally, support on the ground to manufacture locally isn't quite there yet. And it is something that we are harnessing, something that we are working towards. And I'm also very proud that Sarah she spotlighted TFG. And TFG is a retailer that I think we all should be paying attention to. They are coming alongside designers. They're coming alongside local manufacturing. They're wanting to support. They're wanting to put their money where their mouth is. And that is really powerful in an industry for what we're all involved in. Just to break down in terms of some stats from Fashion Revolution, I'm not sure if all of you know, but 1 in 6 people work in the clothing industry. 80% of them are women. 93% of them are below living wage. Let me put that into context for you. In countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, governments are legalizing minimum wage, which is under 1,000 Rand a month. Break that down, that is 33 Rand a day. This basically gives to systemic poverty. And quite honestly, I mean, I don't think any one of us wants to be buying clothing that's being used under slave labor and enforcing slave workers. So the impact of fast fashion on the people who make our clothes is catastrophic. And you and I have a chance to say no. How do we do that? We do that with our voting. How do we vote? You vote with your money. So you support brands that support local industries. You support local designers. And I always get asked the question, well, I cannot afford a local designer because it's too expensive. No, can I? So I walk into manufacturing to industry, into a mall, and I look at Woolworths, I look at Markham, I look at Fashini, I look at one of their stores. I look at where is the product made. You look at the care label. And if it's made local, you've got to go a step further and you've got to Google and find out where are these factories? What are the working conditions? Support brands that you can 100% say that what you're wearing is local. All the speakers have been promoting local, and I think it's up to us to do due diligence and to support local brands. A little bit more in terms of stats, 10% of the carbon footprint, carbon output in the world is from the fashion industry. Let's put this into perspective. That's 5 times more than the carbon output than all airline travel combined. It's man-made polluting plastics from fossil fuels. It is now in half of our clothing. And here I'm talking about polyester. Polyester is non-biodegradable. Every piece of polyester ever made is still on the planet. And it is in our oceans. Fish are eating it, and we are eating that too. With Fashion Revolution, an exciting part that's come up this year has been joining Plain Tiger. And Plain Tiger literally is a e-commerce platform. And they were curating high quality conscious fashion. They were looking at beauty, they were looking at home decor brands from all around the world to put it onto an e-commerce platform. But there was an issue that they were having where the brand owners and the designers were coming back to them to say that they would love to be conscious, they would love to do so much more, but they literally do not have the tools. And they need to be informed, they need to be taught. And so Plain Tiger and myself came together, and we are now launching the Accelerator program. And literally the Accelerator program is going to be 7 different subjects. We've invited key industry facilitators that will teach on these subjects. They form part of Fashion Revolution Zimbabwe. They are from industry, and they have been working in the space for quite a while and have built up credibility. We're also linking to the British Council, we're linking to Fashion Revolution Global, and we're also looking at the UN, the SDG department specifically, because that really affects sustainability at its core. And what we will be doing in the Accelerator is addressing these issues and really talking through them in a practical way so that brands and designers get informed, they get to understand how do we do better. Maya Angelou always said, there was a quote that she used to say that when you know better, you do better. And I do believe that we cannot always shift the blame to industry. You cannot always say that, oh, well, it's manufacturers' fault. I think we as consumers, we as individuals have got to take the responsibility. I always say this in panel talks, that if you care about women's rights, if you care about human rights, if you care about poverty, look no further than the clothes on your back, because that's really where it's at. So thank you so much for the opportunity. You're welcome to ask questions, welcome to hop onto the Plain Tiger website to find out more about the Accelerator. And please hop onto Fashion Revolution's global website and sign the manifesto. We do need the numbers. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Cyril. I just have to say, I really commend you for taking a stance and actually being willing to quit your job to stand by your ethical and your moral values and, you know, what was wrong in that situation. So I think that is really, really commendable. I think what you also linked, and you've said this, that everyone is really almost championing this idea of buying local, bringing it back to local production. And yes, consumers are also a part of that kind of chain. So how would you say a designer or a retailer can actually kind of educate the everyday consumer to buy the correct thing? How can you motivate them? Because if we implement all these strategies, we are more sustainable. How do we get that everyday person to actually buy that? How do you convince them?
For sure. I think, you know, we're living in a digital age, and we're living in an age of technology, and everyone's on Instagram. Everybody is on all social media platforms. And I would say use this platform for good. And I would say that, you know, start talking about, as a designer, start talking about your design process. Most importantly, I think people are interested in authentic stories. I think, you know, the speakers before spoke about greenwashing. And, you know, consumers are really smart. They actually know when you are basically giving them a different story. And I would say, be authentic, tell honest stories, and let your consumers know where things are coming from. And, you know, it's a beautiful thing when you see designers say that when you support us, you're supporting local business. And then you see a snapshot of a machinist, or you see a snapshot of a textile designer. That is important. And, you know, something that I do want to, I've got to look for it and quickly read it, because this is a Fashion Revolution statistic that I want to give you, is that 70% of consumers want brands to share detailed information about wages and working conditions of people in the supply chain. And that's from a Fashion Revolution survey in 2020. And then I have another statistic, which is very interesting to note, that 78% of consumers want brands to share detailed information about the environmental impacts of their products. This is from Fashion Revolution Survey 2020. So I think if a designer understands these core values, we really would be in good hands in terms of the future of global fashion. And I think that's really what designers can do, is highlight these stories and tell people, tell consumers that this is what their purchasing is doing and this is what they're solving.
Our panelist, Ridwana, has a question. So she says she's curious as to what you would answer to the last question I asked her about sustainable fashion being available to the average South African consumer. So because our country is there's such a disparity in income. So if you had to, kind of propose this idea of sustainable fashion to someone in a lower income, is it something that is actually feasible?
I think it is feasible. Let me go back to PEP stores. PEP stores, for instance, 40% of the footwear in PEP stores is locally produced. And you would know that PEP stores have bought over Lakshan culture, and they are sort of working on that brand DNA before he passed away. And they are pushing the local sustainable mandate. Again, I would say all our retailers in South Africa, and again, huge shout out to TFG. And I'm not sponsored by TFG. This is not a paid promotion, but I'm just so happy that, and the reason why I'm pushing that agenda is because I came from that industry and I knew that they were not willing to adapt to sustainability. But TFG is really swimming upstream and pushing, which means that you can afford local clothing and you can sort of endorse sustainability. So yes, you can. I think the narrative has to be changed. So this year, specifically with Fashion Revolution, what we did is there's 11 official languages. And I kept thinking, why is Fashion Revolution South Africa not as huge as the rest of the world? And it dawned on me that we don't speak in our vernacular. We have 11 official languages. And the Fashion Revolution mantra, the main one, who made my clothes, had to be translated into 11 official languages. We've got to, sort of pick small battles and stick to something and do it well. So when we start talking about sustainability, start talking to people in their language, start bringing people on board that relate and resonate within certain cultures. And the fashion industry needs a revolution also in a shaking up in terms of being fully represented, specifically in South Africa. And I think this is important. So if you want to talk about the sustainability issues in local communities and in communities that can't afford it, you've got to reach out to people that can meet them where they're at. That is important. You cannot take a British curriculum of Fashion Revolution and adopt it to a South African mindset. It's not going to work. So we've seen that in the last few years, and now we're starting to change. Now we're starting to look at, okay, how could we South Africanize our content? How can we make it relevant? Who can we bring into our team that can start speaking to local communities? Who do we address? So that those are all important questions coming through. And if anything, there's a lot of work that we have to do ahead of us.
Okay, thanks, Cyril. And then Sarah, other panelist, has asked, she's so thrilled to hear about the accelerator program. What key areas or challenges will that program cover from Plain Tiger?
Sure. So we are looking at circularity. We're looking at waste management. We're looking at working with local communities in a sustainable way. We're looking at the responsibility of design. We're also going to be covering PR and communication in terms of how do you address this as a sustainable designer. And as most creatives, myself included, we not always know financials. We're going to be talking about understanding your financial system in a sustainable way. So these are some of the topics, but the full outline and the curriculum is on the website as well. So those are just a few of the things that we're going to be addressing.
Okay. Before I get to the audience questions, do any of the other panelists perhaps have a question for Cyril? You can just unmute your mic and ask. Okay, maybe someone still needs a little bit of time to think. Okay, in our chat, Simonea said, is there no academic body or research hub that collate all the possible sustainable brands in one accessible place? At least honest information around the level of their sustainability. It's similar to how NewsGuard measures an online platform's credibility.
No, the answer is no to that question in terms of one hub, but there are numerous bodies. Sourcing Journal is one that has incredible information. Good On You app, has insightful information there as well. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation, certainly Fashion Revolution. So I think, there are various different bodies, but in terms of or in terms of an academic body, I think probably Jackie May might have a better response to that one, but I don't think, not to my knowledge at this point in time.
Okay. Cyril, thank you so much for the information on the accelerator program and all your insights. I think the stuff that Fashion Revolution is doing is just fantastic. So thank you so much.
Deandra, thanks to you and thanks to the Stadio team, and keep up the great work that you guys are doing. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Bye.
Bye. Okay, our next industry representative is Jackie May. So with Jackie's abundance of qualifications, there's quite a lot. She has a BA degree in English and political philosophy, a PG dip in sustainable development from Stellenbosch, a PhD dip in marketing management from UNISA, and an MA in philosophy from the University of London. So she has certainly created an expert name for herself in the industry. She's gained over 25 years of industry experience from the work she's done in media, big mainstream media organizations within both London and South Africa. And Jackie has certainly created a name for herself due to her qualifications, her industry experience, as well as producing content for print, digital, and television. So her industry experience also consists of an editorship working within South African edition of Marie Claire magazine, as well as the Cape Town edition of the Times newspaper. And then in 2018, Jackie founded Twig, which is an online platform that focuses on promoting modern, sustainable living, for which she creates social media exhibitions, campaigns, stories, and events. So as a cultural role player, Twig's mission is to change behavior and to advance sustainability through creating people and planet-friendly desires and aspirations. So she's got a true passion for supporting the creative economy and transition towards this idea of a circular economy, which is why Jackie launched the Twig Sustainable Fashion Awards in 2019. So she's going to talk a bit more about Twig. Jackie, you can switch on your camera and your mic.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for the invitation, and thank you for everybody else's conversations. I feel like I actually can't add anything of real value. There was so much information, and I think all the other speakers have really covered the base, or more than just the basics. I mean, have been quite thorough in presenting sustainability and fashion to you. So I think what I'm going to just do very briefly is just chat through what I do. And I think Cyril spoke about the narrative. He mentioned the word narrative a few times during his presentation. And what really fascinates me, and what I think is really important, is how do we change not only designers but also consumers. And I mean, we're all consumers and we're all designers. We're designing life every day as we go about our daily lives, is designing how we're going to conduct the day, what we're going to do with our day. How are we going to be improving our on the previous day? And then we consumers, because during that day, as we design our lives, we're paying for things and buying things and filling up with petrol and buying milk in a plastic bottle, etc., etc. So really, my role at Twig is to think about, to kind of imagine what a future looks like, and identify designers and people who are already partly living that future life, and present them to our audience, to kind of showcase this is what a future could look like, and more of this would be great for our planet and for people. So yeah, is my camera not on? I thought it was. Hang on. It says it's on my side. It's on. It says it's on here. So I don't know what. And my little green light is on. Can everybody else not see me either? Okay.
No. Oh, can you guys see Jackie? Okay, I can't see her on my side. Then I don't know what's happening. Okay. Sorry, Jackie. It's fine. I just thought.
So some people can't and some people can. I don't understand that.
I think if you maybe put it off and on again, it might work.
Okay, let me try. Okay, and it's off now, and I'm going to put it on.
There I can see. Yes, now it's working on my side.
Okay, great. So, and what's interesting about that is that, firstly, I have to also say that when I started Twig, there was so little of this conversation and so little experience and examples to showcase. And just over the last 2.5 years, the interest has really grown and the examples have grown, which is really incredible. And that we've got 2 courses that you two, that Stadio is doing and Plain Tiger is doing to really help grow this as well is amazing. It's absolutely fantastic. And it just makes me so happy and so excited. And yeah, I think we really have to get slow very, very fast. But I think just listening to everybody and listening and sitting here thinking about where we are, I think what really troubles me so deeply is the context that we live in South Africa, and we are so in such an incredibly unequal society. There is so much poverty, so much unemployment. So whatever we do, whatever we think of, has to put the person in the middle of this conversation and the decision making. And alongside, and with that person in the middle is that person, whatever we do has to be so considered about. We have to consider nature and how nature will be affected by putting that person in the middle of the decision making table or the decision making process. Society is not functioning. I mean, that terrible story in Fort Hare last week is an example of our society just not functioning properly. And the reasons for that is apartheid, colonialism, and it is inequality and unemployment. And fixing communities and fixing society should be our priority. And I think the way that the sort of runaway capitalism has destroyed trust in communities and people not trusting each other. I mean, I'm being very broad strokes here, and communities operate in different ways, but we have to come back down to caring for each other and caring for communities. And what that looks like as a fashion is kind of what we're all exploring at the moment. And I'm very interested in, with a circular economy, one of the primary, you mentioned it, Sarah, is one of the primary things of the circular economy is repair. And if you go into townships and if you go and look around and walk up and down the streets there, repair is happening on all the corners. I mean, there are cobblers fixing shoes, there are people fixing clothes, there are tailors working from container ships. So much of the circular economy is already happening in South Africa. It's just not happening in big, large retail companies. And those small examples of the circular economy are feeding lots and lots of people already. And I think we should be celebrating that. And I think we should be bringing that to the fore. And in fact, I wish that I had all these repair opportunities in my community where I live. And I must tell you, where I live is not nearly as nourishing as some of those communities where people are growing food in their backyards. They are sharing the food that they make in their home with their people, people in their streets. But we have these examples, and if we can elevate and share them, I think it would be really showcasing to the rest of the world that sustainability is, as Ridwana said, it's here, it's entrenched. It's just, we've been in a way duped, can I say, by some of the fast fashion trends and thinking so many things. And we have to be very careful about where that takes us. And as much as I really understand and appreciate what the master plan is doing, which is really to create jobs, we have to be very careful about what those jobs look like and what those jobs are doing and what they're doing, not only for our communities, but also what they're doing for nature. So yes, I'm terribly supportive of the master plan, and I'm very supportive of growing local manufacturing. But I think as sustainability advocates, we need to be the watchdogs. Cyril, I mean, you will agree with me as a member of the Fashion Revolution team. I think Fashion Revolution needs to be guarding against unsustainable practices. Cyril mentioned polyester. 67% of our clothing, and I think in some cases with local manufacturers it's higher, but 67% of our clothing is made of plastic. And the plastic is not only polluting, it's bad for communities, it's bad for the environment. It also is keeping the petrochemical industry alive. And thanks to the petrochemical industry, fast fashion has been able to grow exponentially because it creates cheap fabrics. So we have to look at what fabrics can be grown sustainably in South Africa. We really have to try and keep that whole loop sustainable and local as much as possible. I mean, that what happened in July in KZN kind of showed us how vulnerable supply chains are, and so did COVID. International supply chains are very vulnerable. So are our local supply chains. What does that mean for industries that are going to grow fast? How are they growing? Anyway, I think what I've just done now is just dumped a whole lot of thoughts, probably fairly incoherently, onto you. But yeah, it's nature, but it's people. We really have to care about people. And internationally, big fast fashion brands, the people who run them are incredibly, incredibly rich. Some of the richest people in the world, and they tend to be from the global north. So what is the motivation for those companies, and how can we change that? I mean, money and profit is important, but how much profit? What do we need is another thought. Something I think about a lot is, what do we need, and are we addressing the needs of our communities, or are we pushing trends and wants into their psyche so that we can sell things to them that they don't need? In sustainability, obviously, and job creation and growth, the idea of producing and consumption is incredibly important. But I keep arguing with people who talk about we've got to produce stuff. Is like, what is that stuff? What is that stuff that people are going to buy? Is it? I mean, maybe it's not things. I mean, I love the idea of digital fashion. I love the idea of digital tailors. There's something wonderful about the Sims game where people buying digital clothing. Anyway, yes, I think Talita, the stuff does not have to be objects. But I think that's enough of me dumping thoughts on you. Let us, if you've got any questions or anything else that I can tell you about Twig, but I would, let me get back to Twig, because I think there are some very interesting things that we are working on. First thing I'd like to tell you is that we have launched the nominations for the Twig Awards. I'm very excited about this year's Twig Awards because we have partnered with EcoStandard Label to help us design the criteria and the questionnaire for designers to help them navigate around the application form. That's also going to help us with a directory, which we're working on in terms of that standard. So Cyril saying we're going to kind of curate a kind of a stringent directory of sustainable brands. The other thing I've been doing a lot of work in is in the recycling. Sarah's has done this research as well, but a lot into recycling of textiles locally. And that is also why I've done quite a lot of work around understanding what our fabrics are made, what our clothes are made of in the local retailers. I mean, I went into a retail shop the other day and it just smelled like if you had to set a light onto one of those rails, the whole shop would go up in flames. I mean, it's all just so much plastic. So that's very exciting. We're trying to raise funding for a pilot project. That's what we're working on at the moment. And let me see what else we're doing. Content creation, looking for people to profile, managing a team, and trying to grow. I think the idea about storytelling, I'm probably going to be doing my MPhil on using storytelling as a vehicle to create change as fast as possible. I think obviously it's a big passion of mine. So bringing sustainability, sustainable development, fashion, and storytelling together. So thank you very much for listening to me rabbit on.
Thank you so much, Jackie. Thank you very much for everything. I think it's insightful to know that there is something like Twig out there that is promoting, all these sustainable elements. I think a question that I have is what Cyril also said. He started off his talk saying that he was quite disillusioned, when you finish your fashion education. And I think it's something I can relate to as well. You have this idea of you're going to be a fashion designer, you're going to work overseas and travel and all of those lovely things, but the reality is quite different. And you've said this idea of community. Do you think there's value in maybe designers or possibly retailers actually learning from local communities in the processes that they follow, in terms of actually there is already this idea of some sustainability happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, I mean, you know, we live in such a strange world where, especially with COVID, we've become so local, but this idea of global is really important. So, I mean, understanding what your community wants and needs and what they're already doing is, you know, very important. I mean, what we are, I mean, if I'm just trying to think, you're asking about sustainability practices that are practiced by local communities. It's so varied across South Africa. I mean, Cyril has already just spoken about how many different vernaculars are spoken here, but the same in terms of how people live their lives and organize their lives. And because of the crazy kind of inequality in our country, or people live in different ways as well. So I think, yeah, if I was a designer, I think that's really important too. And if I was a design educator, I think, again, understanding what jobs are needed, what product is needed, what people desire, what do we need to create a sustainable wardrobe. You know, maybe it's not making clothes. Maybe it's, as I said, repairing clothes. Maybe it's growing cotton. Maybe it's something completely different to what we have been thinking is what we should be teaching fashion students. I think that waste is a big issue, and maybe not only clothing waste. What other waste can be used in clothing? What about food waste? Can't we think of food waste? What food waste? I mean, 49% of South African, it's a horrific stat. I think the 49% of food produced in South Africa is wasted. Why can't we use that waste? That's a real tragedy in South Africa. Can that tragedy not be turned into a success by looking at within the South African context, looking at what our problems are and what possible solutions we can create out of those problems?
Okay, great, thank you. Laura and Sarah, do you maybe have a question for Jackie?
Yeah, sure. I have one. Jackie, what new industry partnerships do you think local designers need to really move towards circularity?
Food waste.
Yeah.
I think innovation and technology are really important. I think trying to understand how we can develop and innovate new ways is important. But not only, I mean, new is not always the best. It's also possibly partnering with traditional communities. I also think that, like Cyril has been speaking about the retailers, I think it's really, really important to partner with retailers from a very, you know, for fashion colleges to partner with retailers, not only for the colleges, but for the retailers to learn, like the stuff that you and Laura have presented here, for them to understand everything that you've been studying and researching. I think that's really important. I think what I've also found is government is very important. Local government is very important. You know, waste management systems, understanding, you know, what's happening to your waste, where's that going to? I have found working with the City of Cape Town and with other organizations and other departments in local government really, really useful. I mean, it's very hard to get information out of them, but once you do, and once you do get access, it's useful. They know a trick or two, and I think policy is also very important for sustainability. I mean, I don't know if you probably have heard all of this, but in Cape Town very soon, the amount of organic waste that we're going to be able to send to, I think even next year, it's being reduced to 50% of what we currently send to landfill, which is going to change the way people manage their waste at home. Half of my kitchen waste is going to have to be handled in a different way, which I'm kind of exploring at the moment. But that's a regulation that's being implemented by government. So what will that do? You know, if local governments suddenly say you can't send any textile to landfill, what does that mean for designers?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting point, because it's almost like the tipping point will drive change. And I spoke to a group of engineers a couple of weeks ago about circular economy, and they'd never really thought about fashion and engineering together. But this idea of the tipping point will drive change, and that I love your point about working with government, but also cross industry to facilitate these conversations. It's really exciting.
Okay, we've got a question from Ridwana as well. She says she's curious as to the thoughts of Jackie and Sarah and Laura, since they both mentioned digital fashion, about the carbon footprint of things like NFTs.
It's a good question. Yeah, I think it's very hard to really understand that. It depends also how much of it will be used and how popular it gets, and how much it expands by. Ridwana, I don't know. We'll have to see what the life cycle assessments say about it, actually. Just thinking about that.
I have to agree with you. I think it's a difficult question, and I'm sorry I had to pose it for you, but you have the expertise to answer it. But yeah, I think that we have to be very careful about digital fashion, simply because the demands on energy is just so high from it. And I mean, I love the idea of having something that no one else has, and I love the fact that it exists only in this other realm. But I also don't really love the idea that every time I look at it, or every time I want to swap it with someone else or sell it to someone else, there's this cost to it that I'm not really happy to pay. So yeah, food for thought. But yeah, very interesting.
But I think it is early days, and I think what's interesting, I mean, life cycle assessments. I don't think we've mentioned life cycle assessments this evening, but life cycle assessments are going through a bit of a rethink at the moment, because they haven't. I mean, the life cycle assessment discussion and debate between cotton and polyester has been very heated, and I think for a long time the life cycle assessments of cotton and polyester haven't taken into account the very final cradle to grave, the grave part of it, meaning with polyester is really dangerous at the grave end of the assessment, the cycle. And it would be interesting to see, and I'm sure those studies are being done already, but it'll be interesting to see what they say. There is actually, let me see if I can find it. There has been a study done on digital fashion, rental fashion, and fast fashion. I can actually find it. I think it might have said digital fashion is the least environmentally. Sorry, I'm just. I'm going to get it wrong if I try and remember. But
that's interesting. Pop a link if you find it. I said that's very interesting. Pop a link in the chat if you can find it. I'd love to read it.
Yeah. I'm going to see if I can find it now. Okay. I'll find it while you think about it. If there's another question.
Yeah, I think I'm going to ask that all the panelists, Sarah, Laura, you guys as owners as well, put your cameras on. Thanks, guys. Okay, thanks everyone, all industry representatives, of your contributions in this session. It's all invaluable. I'm going to open it up to Sarah and Laura to lead the questions to the panel of industry representatives.
Sure. Sorry, I've lost my script. Just bear with me 1 second. Yeah. Sorry. Laura, do you have yours up? Maybe you can take the first question. Sorry, I'm sorry, I've lost it. Laura, are you there? Okay.
Yeah, I think, Sarah, while you look for it, I think if maybe someone could clarify just what NFTs are to everyone else here. I don't know if everyone is familiar with that.
I will. So NFTs are non-fungible tokens, and they're in essence products that exist only in the digital space. So in my industry, it is insanely complicated, beautiful, absolutely intricate footwear that potentially could never ever be manufactured, but they owned in a digital space. You can sell them and you can swap them and you can loan them out to people, but each time they're used, there's an environmental cost to it, and that's the problem I was discussing with Jackie, is the environmental cost with regard to that. they're pretty. I mean, it's a pretty interesting way to consider non-ownership of a physical product, right? And it started primarily in the art space. Started with digital art that wouldn't necessarily become something that you could hang on your wall or see in a museum as a physical thing. You know, you could see it on a screen, for instance. But and then it kind of sort of was adopted by other industries too. So now you find that there are complete digital collections of fashion, for instance, or footwear or accessories, or it doesn't really matter. It's not really limited to one particular thing. Fabulously interesting concept, and something that I think was also, it's warranted by the times, right? We live in a digital age and things are just so easily accessible and just so, I mean, technology is amazing today. So it was definitely coming. But yeah, so, you know, it pretty much works like, for instance, these, like there are like cryptocurrencies, for instance. Cryptocurrencies carry a heavy environmental cost. And, you know, I mean, it's great. Bitcoin is amazing. People are getting incredibly rich using, you know, like mining for Bitcoin and that sort of thing. But like there is a cost to it.
That's very interesting. Yeah, Bitcoin, but also the concept of authentication in a digital space as well. I think that's the really interesting point, is how that's going to change consumption, but also how can we verify what we have bought as being real. And I think when we talk about tech, blockchain is also a very exciting moment opportunity, but also, like you said, there is uses a huge amount of energy as well. So that trade-off between moving to digital, but also kind of mindful of the environmental impact.
100%.
So, I mean, I think I'd like to open that up, as we've touched on it, but do you think that digital products could be a new form of sustainable consumption? Do you think that the South African market would embrace that?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, the general panel. Sorry, yes.
All right. Maybe I'll let Jackie go first. Jackie, I was talking for a while.
Sorry, sorry, I'm just being distracted.
No, that's fine.
Do I think it will take off?
Yeah, could it take off in a South African context?
You know, I would like to see, you know, so we watch all the big influencers on our social media, you know, with millions of followers, wearing different clothes all the time. I would like to hope that those would be digital clothes at some stage. I think it would be fun for designers. I know we have a digital tailor in the country, and it would be nice for her to be able to do that. But on the other hand, I mean, I don't want to see them replace promoting local brands. I would hate, you know, them not to be wearing Tebe Magugu and Lazan Viviers and because one of the things that I get really upset about is people buying international heritage brands when they should be buying our local designers.
Great.
So if they, but I think we've got I mean, I think it's a fun and it's an innovative way of exploring fashion. But I probably would prefer us to continue with the tangible clothes that people have made because of the impact that has on our communities and on jobs.
Yeah.
And I'm very passionate as well about the potential of hemp and what they can do in rural communities in terms of job creation. And I think that as a community of sustainable fashion advocates, we should be really pushing hard to make that happen. As with organic cotton, we don't have any organic cotton in this country. And I think that I've seen it develop in other countries and in Africa, and it's been amazing for smallholder farmers, and they're making money out of the global north, luxury brands producing organic cotton, and we're not doing that because either, I mean, maybe it's not the right country for organic cotton, or cotton at all, but hemp certainly it is, because we know that we have.
But I mean, that point of innovative fibers is something that Laura and I touch on in our module about, we're seeing, so in Italy, there's orange fiber that has less of an environmental footprint. So one of the questions we ask in our module is how, from what we can see, what's happening in Global North, what industries do we already have that we could integrate that? And I think South Africa and even Zimbabwe produce like the highest rate of oranges that are then exported out of the country. So when we look, there's orange production and then orange peel and the byproduct, maybe that's a new industry that can support growth for the sector. So I think it's really these new fibers could open up opportunity.
So we need to develop, so I mean, we've been talking about fashion, sustainable fashion, how much of that is actually going to become a chemistry degree or a chemistry course? Because biomaterials, what does that involve? I mean, this thing about food waste, capturing food waste, or onions going rotten. What can we do with onions in terms of the dyeing processes? I think,
Yeah, I think the quote is something like the fashion designers of the future will have to be bioscientists, and that now looking at, even in London, bringing in an element of biochemistry into a traditional fashion degree as well as that's going to be the next gold dust. So yeah, definitely.
That's a pretty interesting. I'm going to chip in here. Sorry, that's a pretty interesting viewpoint. So, just recently, I've engaged with a very young startup in Kenya who have spotted a gap in the. It's a pineapple fiber, but it's not exactly made from pineapple skins like Piña Textiles. They are actually using the leaves of the pineapple to create a sort of a canvasy fiber. And, they were thinking, well, what we've got this textile and it's great, but what do we actually do with it? So I think that we are in a great space as a continent, not just a country, but as a continent, because we have incredible natural resources. But we also seem to have a lack of the drive for the knowledge and the tech that sits behind innovating in the textile space. It's really not easy. It's really not simple. Processes like, for example, you're talking about the orange leather, but there's grape skin leather, there's micro leather, and there's like a bunch of other alternatives to it. But there's so much science and there's so much tech behind it, and I'm afraid that we are still a little bit behind on that. The drive needs to come from education.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, even algae, that's a very exciting new space, and there's a lot of innovation happening. Yeah, and I was trying to Google a little bit more to understand algae in South Africa, and it's completely untapped as an opportunity. So yeah, I think there's a conversation about what is the role of higher education in this conversation, and it's really crucially so important in driving these things forward. And then also establishing partnerships with other universities like the University of Pretoria and their engineers, because they have bioengineers. So fashion, much like Laura was saying, goes beyond just operating in silo and starts to touch on other new industries and partnerships. Yeah, so I think my next question was for Cyril. I know in your background you're looking at luxury. What do you think the future of more sustainable luxury could look like?
I think that it's always a question that always comes up, in terms of luxury and sustainable fashion. And I think if you look at fashion in itself, fashion is quite luxurious, and we enjoy it, we love it, specifically high-end fashion. And I think we certainly need to create sustainable methods and values there. So I think the gap is huge. It's open. A lot of international designers are going that direction. But you've also, again, like what we were talking about earlier in terms of greenwashing, you've got to be so careful in terms of, the processes. And is it really just a marketing ploy, or is it 100% accurate? So I think, luxury in the sustainable sector is going to be growing. It's going to keep growing. We've got to keep our eye on it. I just want to come back to the fabrics that we were talking about in terms of, the silk made out of the orange fiber, etc. The thing that's important to remember is, while we may have we have the raw materials and we could get people to work in it, the issue is funding, and the issue is to create those factories and laboratories. Apart from education, I think, we need corporate South Africa to get behind. We need government funding as well. And this is something that's important, which I think, all of us can band together in terms of creating awareness with regard to that, because, if other countries can do it, we can certainly do it as well. And we can do what's possible here. But we do need a global buy-in.
Yeah. So just, today Stats SA released its new figures about the local GDP, and we suddenly are much richer than we thought we were.
Oh, interesting.
But also on the reverse of that, of the stats, is that the unemployment rate is staggering. It's the highest that it's ever been.
Yeah.
And there's so much opportunity to be had in this. I was busy doing a report for another company and around the unemployment situation, and there's this drive toward the drive comes from the Presidential Youth Employment Initiative, of the idea of a sort of traditional qualification process to be either simplified or not necessarily done away with, but there needs to be like this dropping of barriers between the young person with a qualification and the job looking for other qualifications in addition to. So, if we think about like Sarah was saying, like the drive behind funding and that sort of thing, these are great opportunities to not necessarily have to dive into, masters and honors and that sort of thing for something that is so necessary right now. You can literally almost like look at it from an artisan point of view, or from a sort of necessary skills point of view. Like, you're not going to learn how to be, for example, a plumber. It's not going to take you 5 years to learn how to be a plumber. You're learning for a set amount of time, and then you're gathering all the experience that you need whilst you're working in the job. So I figure that going forward, we need to be looking at situations like that to allow more people to enter. Because I have dealt with people who have said, well, I love the fashion industry, but I have absolutely zero skills in design. Well, why would you need to design if you wanted to be in the industry? You don't need to be a designer. You need to have a brain and you need to have some ideas. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, even myself, my background was not initially in fashion design until I studied it. And there's so many opportunities within the business model as well. And so when we start talking about circular business models as well, that's a whole other area that has to shift. And I think it's really exciting, the opportunities even for tailoring services that could be the increase in accessibility. I was thinking about, Jackie, your point about being in a more nourishing community or the township economy. My mom recently went to go get her boots fixed, and she's had them for 20, 30 years. And it wasn't easy to find someone that could fix those boots. And it ended up being cheaper than buying a new pair of boots, but access as well is really important. And I think increasing awareness in that. So, I mean, I think one of the things we're interested in is, what skills do you think future designers are going to need coming out of, say, Stadio or somewhere else? Where do you see the idea of equipping designers for the future?
I think I'm going to jump in on that one, because apart from, all the stuff that we learn from studying fashion, I think designers need to have empathy. They need to come out with a real sense, and I'm only talking about South African designers. I think you've got to understand the complexity of our country. You've got to understand the history of the country, the political history. And you have to have empathy when you're designing, because, you cannot talk about sustainability or being a conscious person without talking about our history, or else you then become a designer that's in a very niche market, designing for a niche market. I think it's important to be a designer that designs for all, and accessibility is important. And we constantly get asked the question, and I think it was asked today in terms of, how can sustainability be accessible to mass market? And the only way it can is if we have designers that come out thinking about that, and that sort of really have the intention to design for a market. I think the possibilities are endless. You can really do incredible stuff, and you can do incredible stuff while doing it the right way.
Yeah. I think, and so, I mean, it was just interesting as you started speaking, if you reflect on your studies, what is it that if you look at what you studied when you did study, if you do that course now, what would you like to have learned?
Oh, Jackie, I think about this often, because, our curriculum was so tailored to studying here and then going overseas and working overseas. We were never, we never were encouraged to look at our own narrative, to look at our own. I'm Indian, so I'm fourth generation Indian South African. So we have incredible stories just here on in South Africa. And yes, it comes from indentured laborers, it comes from slavery, but we still have a beautiful story to tell. And, and I think now Lukhanyo and Sindiso Tebe, they're all telling these beautiful stories. And I mean, you and I have these conversations often that the world wants what's on the African continent. And I think so often that if I studied back again and this is going back to 1990, back then, right? Like if I studied early days, I wish that I was encouraged to look in my community. I wish I was encouraged to look local around me, my surroundings. And that I was encouraged that when I qualify as a designer, I should be looking at working here, local, that I should have my mindset on overseas. And here's the flip side of the coin, that you go overseas and they want what's on the African continent. So I think if designers can harness what we have here, we'd be so much better equipped for doing beautiful stories. And
I think I don't know if you're all familiar with Katakani Moreko, who is a student at DUT. His final year collection was incredible. I think really harnessed his own story and used the materials that were available to him, which was waste. And it was interesting that kind of reflected on his own and touched on his own story from where he grew up, because the traditional dress was actually made from the waste found in the community. So it was just, it's a very beautiful story about cultural sustainability and environmental sustainability. But yeah, it's interesting, Cyril, and I think the way you've got in your career, so many people have been through that same education, are now running retailers.
And the sad part is
sustained management.
Yeah, and the sad part of that is it's a small mindset. It's a very, hence I jumped at the question, that was asked in terms of, and I said empathy, because I really believe that because of, and Jackie rightfully said, that when you come out of the studies that we come out of, I mean, here's something that's so crazy, and it's totally off topic, but it bears relevance to what I'm going to say, that I'm not that old, but, I matriculated in 94, but I never knew what Nelson Mandela looked like, had no context through my schooling career, no context to what he physically looked like, and because of our education system and the books we had, how things were taken out, that gives you an example from a school level. So fast forward that into tertiary education, how much more misinformation we have about our history, about our country. And then, it's just in the last couple of years, being sort of an adult and doing research for myself, that I get to understand actually what our story really is, and then you start, and we all know that we should use our own minds and think. But when you are studying and you're in an institution, you kind of brainwash for a large extent. And I think very often those that make an impact on the world are the people like Malala, for instance, people that kind of shift completely out of their mindset and they kind of really go against the grain. And I think, Jackie, you so rightly put it, that corporate SA is now in that they're the ones we report to, they all have those blinkers on. And that's why we need a massive shakeup and we need a massive shift in this country.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to open it up to our audience members. You guys can feel free to raise your hand and use your microphone if you would like to pose a question to any of the panelists. Otherwise, you guys can pop the question into the chat and I'll just read it out. So I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to just type their questions, or if you're ready to ask one, just raise your hand. I think Simonea's got one here. So she said, Cyril, I see you have replied. So she asked or said, so we need a better teaching about the history of our own country. Do you guys think that is integral, even in fashion, to understand the complexities of our history to inform this?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to hog up the conversation, but I'd leave it to somebody else to speak, in terms of the fashion syllabus and the fashion curriculum.
So I'll jump in on this one. I think that Dr. Erika de Grief has done the most amazing thing with the decolonizing fashion course that she's run, I think for, I don't know how long now. But that course was absolutely mind-blowing in terms of just the way that it explored how little you actually know about your own history, and how that little that you know about the history that you have doesn't really correlate to your view as an African. Well, that was my personal experience, right? I thoroughly enjoyed the course, but it was very mind-blowing also to see all the other participants of the course, and I think that there were at least about 35 of us, had this, and 35 of us round about the same sort of age-ish, had the same sort of lack of knowledge around what we were talking about in terms of fashion that is South African, or fashion that is local to you. So I definitely think that Simone is asking a good question, and that you need better teaching about the history of your country. You really, really do. And I think, better, we can't really know where we're going if we haven't got a clue about where we've come from. Not that that's everyone else's narrative, but most of the time that is the truth, is that you can't really know where you're supposed to be if you don't know what you're coming from. It doesn't really correlate to each other. So I definitely think that within causes, within, short courses, and these insane, I think that with lockdown, we've come to the realization that knowledge is literally everywhere. It's a mere mouse click away, and it's all there, I think it really is important to be able to do that little journey of self-discovery before tapping into wanting to express yourself as a designer, maybe.
Okay, and then we've got a question from Sanri. She says, good evening. This is a general question for the panel. How realistic is the movement towards slow fashion in South Africa?
Should I do it? I think in many ways, I think Lucanio really is an exemplar of slow fashion designer. I mean, he really takes, does everything that he does at his own pace and does it incredibly, incredibly well. And he's still very young, and I think he's really setting an example of what that means and what it looks like. There are obviously lots of other designers doing some, but just in terms of the designer in the limelight at the moment, it's handmade. A lot of it is handcrafted. He weaves the latest collection, which is a tribute to his friend Nicholas Coutts, was handwoven on a small loom, taught by Nicholas Coutts' mother in his studio in Cape Town. And he doesn't follow fashion weeks. He doesn't follow, he does it when he's ready. And it's just beautiful. And I think that, this make to order model that is also gaining traction with designers is a slow fashion model in many ways. Designers aren't going to make the clothes until they have the order. And I think that's beautiful. I think, I think that, I don't know what that means for retail and for corporate, because we do need retail and corporate for mass job creation in the country. But how do we combine slow fashion and slow fashion principles with corporate needs and corporate demands is also interesting. I think, the idea of corporates and the efficiency that they have to work along with is really important to disciplining our practices and disciplining waste production as well. So I don't know. What do you think, Cyril, about that? Because you're quite engaged with corporates at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to the point about, because I really agree with the slow fashion model, and we know that, Lara Kolosky is doing a bit of that now as well. Lucanio for sure. I think the question earlier was about sustainability and luxury. And I think the slow fashion movement is certainly one that's for the luxury market, because, bespoke, ready to wear, you've got to have the budget and you've got to be able to order it, wait for it, etc. So retail has an important part because retail is available to everybody right now. And I think that's also where probably the opportunity is for retail to get on board with really pushing sustainable, really pushing local. And, even in terms of, I know TFG has got an incubator, a few others, that they can start getting, young design talent, pushing young design talent into their design studios and to design. Then that gives, you kind of meet it at that level. But I think The ready-to-made market is a different one because you've got to be able to pay a little bit more because it's tailored to your size, and so it's going to cost a little bit more. So it's two different markets we're talking to, but I think opportunities exist for both, to kind of learn from both of them.
If I can just throw a thought in here, it's just an observation from the consultancy side, is that we're seeing sort of an urgency from new little brands that are popping up, but an urgency to kind of join the fast fashion movement, because they're so concerned about not reaching market on time, or being sort of like overlooked because of brands like H&M and Zara and Mr. Price, for instance. So just from a small business point of view, I feel like there's this desperate urgency to try and take on these big guys and compete with them. It's not very often with the apparel side of the consultancy that we can actually convince people to take a slow fashion route. And for me, that's worrisome. I think that I know what the cause of the problem is, but I think it's just worrisome. And I wanted to just throw that thought out here, just felt like it fit.
It's so, as a slow journalism platform, just you feel the pressure of your capacity and your budget when you look at, let's talk at fast journalism and slow journalism, fast fashion, slow journalism. The money that is, to dominate the market, just in the media and the advertising space, what fast fashion brands have, the market the money they have to be able to ensure that every consumer has a sight of your work or your. It's just incredible. You can't compete with it in any way. It's why the community and the working at a community level is so important, and gaining the trust from your local consumers and getting to know them. And it goes back to, the local cafe, selling your wares at the local cafe.
Hey guys, I think we've got time for one last question. Cyril, what you said really links well with this. So Courtney's asked, I'm interested to know how the panel suggests overcoming the ego status that's associated with conspicuous consumption, as that is a huge obstacle to sustainable buying behavior and formulating desire.
Ego in the fashion industry with fashion designers? Never heard of something like that. Very good question, Courtney. I think, again, and I don't want to sound repetitive, but I would go back to empathy. I think, look, some designers build their credibility and they can actually have an ego. Katakani, as an example, Lucanio, as an example. They can have huge egos, but I can promise you, these are two of the nicest human beings you will meet on the planet. Humble, down to earth, and they really care about what they're doing. And so I think, like I spoke about in my sort of introduction, I said you vote with your money. And I think, we give credibility to H&M. We give credibility to Zara. We invite them into our countries because we camp outside the stores, outside the malls to wait for their opening, and we don't go and support local designers. So I think we need to shift our focus in, if you look at, Kim Kardashian and you look at all the influencers, they started up because they have following, because people follow them and people endorse what they're doing. So the more you do something, the more they're going to give out of that. So imagine if you had an incredible sustainable influencer. Imagine for a moment if you had designers like Lucanio and the others that you're supporting, and they have no ego, but you keep supporting them. What's going to happen is fast fashion is going to diminish, and these guys is going to go up and up and up. And that's how we're going to equate it. So it actually comes back to you and I, that we create this beast, and we've got to be so careful in who we're supporting, and also be very careful about our compliments. You got to compliment brands that are really doing stuff properly. Be aware of greenwashing. We, as Fashion Revolution, and Jackie can tell you this, we have incredible brands in South Africa that constantly reach out to us. They want to join, they want to get part of it, they want to put it in their windows, they want to do incredible stuff. And when you dig down deeper and maybe third meeting, fourth meeting into the teams, you then realize, oh my word, I'm part of a greenwashing system here. and then you got to backtrack, so I think you got to be careful again where you compliment, who you compliment. And I think when we talk about conscious fashion, it also, I don't know if you ever thought about this, it's also your level of consciousness, so EQ is so important in this industry. And I think, I personally, now just really want to work with people I like. And it's not from a choice of saying, oh, we have so much of work, that's what it is. It's purely because we have so little time. All of us have limited amount of time. And why would you fill up your day with people that have ego? Rather work with people that are passionate, that have a good sense of EQ, like the people on this panel, so enough said.
Thank you so much, guys. I think this has been a very, very valuable session. I really appreciate the time you guys made to give all your insights and your input. So thank you to you, Sarah, Laura, Jackie, Cyril, and Radwana. I think the knowledge gained was really valuable for this topic, and I hope this is just the start of a conversation and this networking to implement these strategies into our fashion industry. I just want to remind everyone who has joined, we will discuss this topic more in depth with a sustainable short course run by Sarah and Laura, so you guys can get more information on that on the website. And you're also welcome to investigate the honors course for 2022, where some of these aspects are also explored and examined. So thank you to the audience who's attending. Thank you to our panelists, and have a great evening. So good night.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you.